so much for coming tonight, and we are glad that you are here. All right?
Yeah.
Take it away.
I've got friends here and students. It's kind of like a dream where people that are in different parts of your life are all in the same place, right? That shouldn't be together. So thank you if you came for experience credit, and thank you if you're not here for experience credit. I really appreciate the support. So artist talks are notoriously boring, right? It's a cliche to say that they're boring, and I think they are. I think they're terribly boring. And I think that's for a number of reasons. I think, first and foremost, artists can get obsessed about things, and there's very few people that care about the subject matter or the technique as much as the artist. And I think the artist, the visual artist at least, believes they're creating a visual language. And so sometimes there's a gap in the translation with how you read their work and how they have interpreted their work. And so, there's that little bit of a disconnect. And I also think it's hard for an artist to talk about work they've just made. There's really not enough hindsight to kind of look back on it, so that's a challenge. So my goal this afternoon is to give you experience credit, to talk about work I've made in the recent past that's kind of led up to the work that you're going to see downstairs, and I'm going to try not to be boring, okay? That's my goal. So, I'm going to put my glasses on, my reading glasses. I have a few notes to kind of keep me on track a little bit, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. I'm hoping we'll have some opportunity for questions and dialogue, so it's not just me talking. But if at any point I'm saying something that you want me to clarify, or if you can't hear because I'm a little muffled, let me know. Just wave me down, okay? Ready? Okay. So animals have been featured dominantly in my work for at least 10 years now, probably a lot longer. And I've liked using animals because I like exploring predator-prey relationships, animal welfare, and how environmental stewardship intersects. So this painting, for instance, that I made a couple of years ago called Megan and Morag is of two domestic sheep that were first cloned by embryonic stem cells. They were the first ones to live to adulthood about a year before Dolly was created. I don't know if you remember Dolly the sheep. She was the first mammal. She was cloned from adult cells. So, my sabbatical. A sabbatical is an opportunity for a faculty member to take time off from teaching and all of their committee responsibilities. So it's like Sabbath. It's like the 7th year. So every 7th year, a faculty member can apply for this. And it's a tremendous gift. It's amazing to be able to just focus on course development and artistic research without all the other committee work. So when faculty are granted sabbaticals, a lot of them purposely go away to the middle of nowhere to avoid distraction. And that kind of happened to me unintentionally because of the pandemic. So I made most of my work, paintings, and some prints in a small studio behind my garage. And it was really kind of an isolating time. I had planned to go back to Costa Rica to meet with an indigenous community called the Baruga that I had first discovered when I went on an alternative spring break that was arranged by Dr. Brian Jennings and Dr. David Osgood went. And we're planning a synthesis course in the spring. So we went to try to, well, my plan was to try to go and follow up on what we already did on that trip. They were an amazing community. They combined shamanic ritualistic practices with animals, including creating elaborate costumes to represent human to animal transformation. And the men perform a reenactment of the resistance to the Spanish conquest from 1510. And I say men because it's only the men. They carve these elaborate masks out of a very light wood like balsa, and they create these costumes. And they create a performance called the Dance of the Devils. So I had a student, an advanced painting student named Faith Mirovich, and she and I were awarded an acre grant in the summer of 2019 to further explore the Baruga and this relationship with animals, folkloric devils, and environmental stewardship. And if you're not familiar with the ACRE program, it's a really cool and kind of unusual program we have here at Albright. It stands for the Albright Creative Research Experience. And it's a competitive program where a faculty member and a student apply for funding together to explore a research project. So Faith and I were awarded one of these, and we met with other pairs of faculty and students doing their own research, and And we independently made paintings of devils and jaguars. So the Woodward jaguar is a really powerful figure. It's echoed throughout a lot of pre-Columbian art. And there's a wonderful book called The Jaguar Within by Rebecca Stone Miller that talks about some of that iconography and symbolism. The Baruka believed the jaguar could travel between two realms, and so it's used as this shamanic figure. And that was kind of experienced in some of the performances that we saw when we went down to Costa Rica. This is a photograph I took actually of one of the performers in Costa Rica. And it was really amazing. It was almost silent, and they had a couple of musical instruments, and they were reenacting this jaguar transformation who brought environmental harmony back in line with the Baruka. And you can see some of the performers with these masks that they create that have human hair and paint and beads, and they're really beautiful objects. So they inspired a lot of my work, much more abstract images of jaguars. I was also fascinated to learn that black jaguars are specifically celebrated because they can, let me see if I get this right, produce both black and spotted cubs, whereas spotted jaguars can only produce spotted because it's a dominant mutation. But that was really interesting, right? Some of the biologists can confirm that for me. So the paintings I was created were kind of loosely based on this idea of these human-animal hybrids and these kind of meetings of these kind of spiritual beings in these kind of dream-like environments. They were obviously not illustrations directly of what was happening with the Baruka. So I was really concerned with cultural appropriation, right? I wanted to be inspired by the Baruka, but not directly depict religious iconography that was not my own. So the devils I ended up painting were taken from my own Judeo-Christian background. And this was a small series of devil paintings. So as you can see by now, I paint fairly abstractly. And this kind of bothers some people. They've said to me, why wouldn't you paint more specifically what you're trying to communicate? And I would answer that my idea evolves when I paint. So the idea isn't fully formed until I start painting. And I do differentiate between painting and illustration. For me, illustration is in the service usually of text, or at least an idea that was formed linguistically, where a painting has its own kind of trajectory and history of mark making that's more rooted in personal expression. And this may sound a lot like semantics, but it's basically a different approach, with a painting being in the service of something and illustrating an idea that's fully formed versus being an object into itself that has its own life and can go in a totally different direction. So there's a fairly large diptych I have in the show downstairs. Not all of these paintings I'm showing are downstairs. I made about 70 paintings during my sabbatical, and there's only about 30 represented downstairs. But anyway, this one's titled Invasive Species. And there are dogs you can see at each bottom corner that started off as Asian foo dogs. And if you know about foo dogs, they represent this kind of harmonic balance between fire and air and earth. But somehow when I was painting them, they turned into Rottweilers. And I think it was because your mind reverts to what is familiar, what you already know. And I was painting the red kind of veins as coral. They started off big, thick coral branches, and somehow they looked more like arteries. And I think that's okay too, because I think it kind of gives a sense of the lifeblood or some living force in the environment, and I was okay with that. But the painting had a bear in it. You can only see what's left of the cloth, and it had other salmon and fish. And so I kind of laugh when people artists post videos online. I'm sure you've seen this on their websites or in social media, where they start a painting, like in stop motion photography, and it's starting, middle, and ends, and it's all comes together beautifully, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Where mine would be like a bear, and then there's fish, and then the color scheme changes, and then I take a blowtorch to the whole thing, and I start over. So it's never like I start knowing where I'm gonna end, okay? So that's what I mean, that it forms in the painting rather than in my mind. So I don't paint domestic animals as much. Dolly the sheep has returned kind of cyclically in my painting. This is one of her with her lab number. And she represents another end of the spectrum about how we engage with domesticated animals. I did a series a couple of years ago called Farm Prize series, and that was inspired by the Reading Eagle doing these spreads on kids in 4-H, and they would be posing next to these animals that were being raised for food. And I thought that was a really strange thing, like these kids are like happily hugging a pig or a calf, and it's livestock, and I'm wondering if these kids have kind of reconciled that this animal is going to be slaughtered or that that's what it was raised for. So just made me think about that, and so I included the children, but I purposely eliminated their features because I wanted them to be just more stand-ins in general for a young person. I didn't want to get into the specifics of race or gender or anything like that. And some of them have like photographic inclusions, collaged in the painting. And it's kind of easy to do because I work in encaustic, which I'll talk about in a little bit. This one perhaps is more obvious, the direct relationship between animals and food. I'm always kind of squeamish about, even though I eat lobster, the idea of picking out an individual animal to eat. And I know there's somebody in the audience who even picked out a dog once, yeah. Right? Yes. Delicious. I did paint a few cats. I couldn't help it. I was surrounded by my 5 cats during the pandemic, so they're kind of like the mascot of my sabbatical and the mascot of the pandemic. So there's like Fat Cat downstairs and maybe Netflix Cat, you know, there are a bunch of cats. But in this case, it's just kind of playing with animals in their environment. I've seen signs around Oli that have rabbits for sale, and it says rabbits, pet, or meat. And again, that kind of haunts me too. I kind of want to buy them all, you know. So another thread that has continued in my work for several years, it actually is represented in work I made during my sabbatical and downstairs, is the idea of a canary in the coal mine. And if you know how miners used canaries 100 years ago in Pennsylvania, they would take caged canaries into the tunnels and to test if the air was too toxic to breathe. So if the canary stopped singing and died, the miners knew they had to get out. So I have been painting a number of these canaries, looking at them as a metaphor for how we are kind of needing to sound a warning bell with what's happening in our environment. And my colleagues in biology, Dr. Osgood and Dr. Mack, gave voice to this. They told me it's called a sentinel species, which I hadn't known about before. And sentinels are a wide variety of birds, mammals, and smaller organisms. I tried including others in my work. Both of them cited polar bears. And I made a lot of bad polar bear paintings. I think because polar bears, I kept thinking of like the Coca-Cola bears, and it was too specific, and the iconography was too closely related to global warming. But that brought me to circus bears. And I'm still kind of fixated, and that's what I'm painting now, are circus bears. I've only seen wild bears twice in my life, but it was amazing to me. You see these gigantic, beautiful animals, and you think, how do they exist in this land with us? How do they exist in this space? And then you see them in circuses, which for some reason they like to put like little tutus on them or hats, and there's this really strange disconnect between this large wild animal and how they're presented for our entertainment. I also used whales as sentinel species, and this one uses a spotted whale. It's also referenced in that book, The Jaguar Within. That's used by the Baruka as well. The patterning and the spots, they believe, connect it to the jaguar. And there's the residual inclusion of one of the food dogs that did survive in this painting, that didn't get painted out at the bottom. I don't know if you can see in green there. So I eventually went back to birds. I think because of their familiarity and their ability to represent transcendence. When I exhibited this work at Studio B, Susan B. Beck's here, I had several people ask me, well, what are the circles? What do they mean? And it's very hard for me to answer. I felt like there needed to be some reference to something geometric, something man-made as opposed to organic, or the idea of a beginning and ending, or a cycle of the moon. And if somebody said, well, which one is it? I'm like, it can be all of it. And it's that ambiguity and the abstraction that engages me. I like the idea that it can communicate a couple of different things simultaneously. So if you take something different away from the painting than I intended, that's okay. So my colleagues in biology also gave me access to specimens, which was really wonderful. That's a nice, cool thing about being at a liberal arts college. You can like pick up the phone and say, hey, I need some access to some dead birds. And until then, I had been using images that I found online, including images like of these that were attributed to Darwin, to Charles Darwin. And they were actually made by an artist named Conrad Martins, which I confess I hadn't heard of. I'd always seen them attributed to Darwin, and I thought he drew them. But if you look at Darwin's sketchbooks, they were just like cryptic little notes and doodles. He hired an illustrator to come and illustrate his ideas and to draw things that he was looking at. So Conrad Martin's works were very important and kind of seminally connected to Darwin's theories. And you can see the evolution. I included like the mask used during the plague that the doctors would have like scented flowers in to protect themselves from the smell. There's a lot of bats in the biology department. And I've gotten accustomed to handling the birds without gloves. They've convinced me, like my rational brain overrid my desire to wear gloves, that they were sterile. So I can unwrap their bodies in cotton and draw them. But the bats I still can't hold. But I wanted to do a series of bats, and I did, and penguins, because these were animals that were blamed for COVID, right? Have you heard that? That bats were carrying it, or perhaps penguins. So I think whether or not that proves to be true, there's no doubt that there's an increase in zoonotic diseases. We're seeing more and more of that crossover as the frailty of our human life intersects with a lot of these exotic species. Some more dead bird paintings. This one was kind of interesting for me because it went through a lot of transformation itself. I started off painting a cardinal, and you could see its head, and then somehow it kind of got tucked into itself, and the painting started off blue, kind of like what I was telling you about erasing and then starting over. And as I was painting over it, I liked the fact that it wasn't covering completely. And for me, it gave a sense of tension and kind of a disturbance, right? It's kind of like crackling or storm. And then it just occurred to me to kind of paint the skeletal remains as though it was kind of separating from the bird. So there was like this corporal body and this kind of spirit, if you will. But I didn't start out necessarily with that idea. I started off thinking I was just going to paint a dead cardinal. It's called Poison Seeds. And these didn't make it into the show because I have a lot of dead bird paintings. A lot of dead bird paintings. And sometimes the birds stand in for human problems. Like this one's called Migration. And you can see it's another example of me muting the human presence. I did want there to be the sense of human migration kind of brought to mind with bird migration. So a little funny story about this too. My sister, who lives in upstate New York, asked me if I would donate some art to a fundraiser she was having for a dog rescue up there. And I gave her an etching of these geese, okay? So she said they want an artist statement. So I wrote this statement about how I'm inspired by the flora and fauna along the Schuylkill River and the geese that crap all over my yard, right? Thinking she would find it funny. Well, she never read it. She just passed it on to the fundraising organizers. So that ended up getting printed in their catalog. All right, so apples. What do apples have to do with animals? Well, I've been really fascinated with the idea of heirloom varieties of fruit that have disappeared or are being re-entered entered into cultivation. For me, they're very related to the concerns I have about animals because they represent human selectivity and choice, like our desire to conform nature to meet our will or our entertainment. I also grew up in an area in upstate New York in a little town called Webster, right on Lake Ontario. And my family were not farmers. They were semi-rural suburbanites. But the area that they built our house on had been an apple orchard. So some of the orchard was cleared, and we still replanted some apple trees. And some that I planted from seed bore fruit. And apple cider mill right down the corner of our house was still producing cider. So I grew up with all these really interesting varieties of apples that I kind of took for granted. Like this one's called the Hidden Rose apple. Has anyone ever eaten one of these? No? I don't know anyone else that has, other than people in my hometown, and now not even them. They have thin, green skin, and they're red inside, and they're pink. And so we would eat these as kids and bite into them, and if it wasn't pink enough, we'd throw one down and we'd eat another one, you know? And we didn't think that they were anything really special. And now it seems like, you know, people really go crazy to try to cultivate them because they require a very specific soil. So I think we didn't realize how special they really were. This one's a wine sap. Really creative with my titles, right? The Duchess of Oldenburg, that's also another heirloom variety apple. Arkansas Black. And I made some banana paintings. So I read a really interesting article about how banana flavoring tastes nothing like the bananas that we know today, right? Banana flavoring, like what is that? Well, the reason I read is because it actually tastes like the bananas our grandparents ate. They ate a banana called the Gros Michel, which was known as a Big Mike. And they ate them almost exclusively because they were grown from a cloned plant, like they are today. And what happened was a fungus in Central America wiped out almost all of the Big Mikes, and so the farmers switched to a hardier variety called the Cavendish, and that's what we eat today. And it's a more starchy kind of banana. And don't get me started on the watermelons. I don't know if you've seen watermelon paintings from the 18th and 19th century, but there's like a huge white rind and a little bit of red fruit with lots of seeds in the middle. So for the first week of class, if you're here, did you paint watermelons? For my painting one class? Yeah. Couldn't find a seeded watermelon, saved my life, right? But at least we got to eat them afterwards. And they were seedless, and they were kind of bland, right? And like I tried to get some with a little variation in color, but they're really consistent, really bearing very little resemblance to what I ate as a kid. Maybe I'm showing my age too, but we would have like seed spitting contests, you know, and you really don't have that anymore. All right, so those are the motivations for the subject matter of my work. I thought I would talk a little bit about the process and the materials, since that's important to my work, and then again, hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. So I've been formally trained in printmaking and painting. That's what I went to school for. And when I got out, I became more interested in a painting technique that's very specific called encaustic. And encaustic uses beeswax as the binder to hold together the pigment. And every artist has their own recipe. Mine is 4-1-1. It's 4 parts wax, 1 part oil paint, 1 part Damar resin. And every artist kind of experiments with that proportion to get different kinds of transparency or different properties from the encaustic. But the reason I love it is because it's never really wet or dry. It's hot or cold. So you have to mix each color separately. You can see how neat my studio is here. And they are cat food cans, coincidentally. So in there is that ratio of those materials. And when it's heated to like a honey-like consistency, you paint the brushstroke and it kind of freezes and arrests the brushstroke. And so there's not the danger of over-mixing. Things don't get really muddy. And then you can move it around a little bit with a heat gun, okay? So it's this really sensory experience. It's very fragrant while I'm working. I usually usually buy white bleached beeswax commercially, pure white, if I want to use bright whites. But then I buy wax from beekeepers at Leesport Market, unless my friend Bev produces some for me who has bees. And Bev, I think you were probably the first to tell me about the brown. So the brown is more fragrant, right? It's unfiltered. And it really smells amazing. But what's less romantic about it is to realize the reason it's brown and to realize why it smells that way is because it contains slug gum, which is bee poop, right? That's what's filtered out, which is really incredibly gross when you think about it. But it can create some beautiful color in your work. Excuse me. So, the last thing I was just going to mention is I did make some prints while I was on sabbatical as well. And the prints are very different from my paintings. I think I go back to that idea of illustration. When you're making a print, you're kind of hand-pulling an image to make multiples. It's kind of a democratic way of making more multiples. And I like making prints because of the possibility of exchanges, right? There's no reason to go through all the trouble to make an etching and then only make one, okay? So what I've done is I've gotten together with some other printmakers throughout the country, and we've had exchanges. So I did two while I was on sabbatical with Melanie Yazzie, who's a Navajo printmaker out at the University of Colorado. And she came up with the theme to do one for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so she said the dimension had to be a certain size, and that was it. That was all the instruction that we were given. So I made 30 prints, and then I mailed them to Melanie Yazzie. And then about a month later, I got a set back, and there was one of my prints, and then 29 from artists all over the country dealing with those same parameters. And the reason I didn't include those in the show is because she actually gave a set to Albright College as well, of both this one and an edition of prints made for Kamala Harris when she was sworn in. So those will be shown at the Freedman at a later date. So that's why I included those. And then the third exchange I did was at the Woodward Art Center from Ohio, and that was like a tri-state exchange. There was an artist I knew who invited me into that, and this year students are going to be participating in that because it's a small print show, and the only parameter of that is to make prints that are 5 by 7 inches. And so that's something we can easily do in the print shop here, and then we send them to Ohio, and then we wait and see what we get. So, that's all the talking I was going to start with, because I would really, really like to entertain questions and have more of a conversation. And I've got some plants in the audience, so some of my colleagues promised to ask questions if you guys didn't, if the students didn't. Okay? Hey, a real student asking me a question.
So you mentioned how if someone asked you to pinpoint a meaning of your painting, sorry, my glasses are fogging up. If someone asked you to pinpoint a meaning of your painting, you know, you tell them I couldn't really do that because when I perceive my painting, I see multiple things. As you look at your paintings, maybe the first, the fifth, or maybe the 100th time, are you able to consistently have different perspectives? Maybe as you grow, does your perspective of your artwork grow? Or is there any specific piece that you see that happening?
That is a fantastic question, and I didn't give that to her. So, I don't know if everybody heard that, but she was saying, you know, if I understand correctly, when I return to a painting, like time and time years later, do I have the same feeling about it? Do I have the same interpretation? I think I remember what I was thinking when I started that painting, but sometimes, and I don't know if other artists have that feeling, you look at something you made a few years ago and it doesn't even look like something you made. You're like, who made that? That's so strange. Because it's hard to get in that space where I remember doing that. So I think yes and no. I remember what I was thinking when I made it. I remember what I was trying to do. But I think differently about it. I mean, first of all, I don't feel attached to anything I make. And I know that's somewhat unusual for artists. I have a colleague that said he didn't like selling his work because he felt like they were his children. And I've always said, if the check clears, you can light it on fire in front of me. I don't care, right? Because I love making it. It's the process and it's the struggle. And I think you experienced that today, right? You're painting and then something doesn't work and then something clicks and you're like, you know, you lose track of time, and that's where the joy takes place. then when you look back on it and you try to analyze it, yeah, you're in a totally different place. You're not going through that struggle. So I think you can reflect on it and say, all right, that was what I was trying to do. It may or may not be successful, right?
Yeah.
Does that answer it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Carol, the stuff guy.
Hi. Great talk. Did you ever think about beauty?
About beauty.
Beauty.
Oh, such
Well,
a good question.
While you're painting, after you're done.
Oh, it's such an awesome question. That could be like a whole talk,
I know.
right? So I've known Carol back from my Syracuse University days, and she has been a real treasure in my life. She's a painter as well, and so you're doing very different kinds of work, right? So she's working with landscape, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful paintings. I don't think mine are beautiful, but I want there to be a seductive element to draw people in. Like, I love Sue Coe's work, and I love Alex Rockman. Both of them have these very strong environmental messages, but they almost read like propaganda. They're very graphic. And I feel like there has to be a little subtlety or nuance to bring the viewer into my work. So I want there to be maybe something, if not beauty, something sublime. But I don't look to make something beautiful, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, I've made paintings in the past that have been non-objective, with no recognizable subject matter. And I was really caught up in that, I think, after I left grad school. Almost like the abstract expressionist, and that's the show that's in the main gallery now, too. Artists that were making work about the process of painting, right? They were making work about line and color. It was about form. It didn't have an underlying narrative. But at some point in my life, I think that became less satisfying for me personally. I felt like I needed something else going on in the painting. It's almost like I was having a conversation and I wasn't getting much back, right? Does that answer it?
It does, because I look at the paintings and you talk about the encaustic and the brush mark and the fluidity of the making, and it just, that seems to be the hook in terms
Yeah, I like juicy paint. I like it to be juicy and like lots of layers and scraping, but I don't know that everybody finds that beautiful though. I think there's an ugliness as well. There's a crudeness and there's a sense of erosion maybe that John's nodding, yeah. So I don't know, teetering on beauty and ugliness intrigues me a lot more than just going straight for beauty, Yes.
I guess I'll ask a historical beauty and ugliness question. You're not the first person to paint fruit or
Right.
animals, and my mind goes back a couple places to Dutch still life painters of the 17th century, and heaps of things, and fruits and flowers and animals in various states of decay.
Yeah.
Right, the whole idea of nature morte and the vanity of beauty and having those things rot away, and then but they're so realistic, right? It's
Yeah.
almost a denial of painting. It's a way of sort of representing reality in an almost unmediated way, seemingly. But then I think of Cézanne and all of his beautiful fruits as well, and those are more painterly, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're all sort of perfect and not rotting and not decaying.
I already actually painted plastic fruit sometimes too.
Oh, okay,
And I
yeah.
could explain it.
But I think yours combines both. I think the encaustic, the thickness of it, as you say, the juiciness of it. Don't hold these up as an ideal type of apple or something like that. They're in some sort of process, or the animal paintings where they're transforming from one species to another. And so in some ways your medium is a different way of doing what those Dutch painters were doing in the 17th century.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I forgot to even mention the whole idea of apple as like a symbol of temptation, right? So Baroque artists were creating these vanitas, right, to often tell like these biblical narratives in a Protestant country. So it was like this encoded language, and I think that's what attracts me to these apples, these like perfect formed pieces of fruit. Yes.
What artists, past and present, are your inspirations?
Oh, I love that question. First and foremost, I would say Rufino Tamayo. I love, love, love Tamayo's work. He, I think, was able to stay on the cusp of exactly what I want to do with my work. I want it to be kind of like archetypal. I want you to kind of sense these figures and animals that have some kind of connection, but it's not a direct illustration. So I keep going back to Tamayo. And my work always gets too fussy. I think I start getting more into the detail. So I'm loving the fact that he simplifies. I still really like a lot of abstract expressionist painters. Like I love standing in front of a Rothko. They're just really beautiful, and they're these environments that kind of glow. But I think it really depends on how the artist represented their time, right? Like you have to love Goya because he was painting these horrific paintings during being in the middle of the war, you know? So I think I love different artists for different reasons. So if I had to pick one, it would be Tamayo. If I had to pick artists that dealt with animals, it would be, you know, Sukkot, right? But there's different ones. And Dr. Perrin wrote this wonderful little mini essay. It's in the brochure they printed in my work too. And he talks about some artists that he thinks might have inspired me as well. Van Smart. Good question. All right, we have to talk for 5 more minutes because I told David we wouldn't leave to go down to eat until at least 1:45.
Do you think your work would have been different had there not been a pandemic and social unrest and everything else that happened in 2020 going on?
That's a great question. Yeah, it was so bizarre. It was so strange because I had all these plans. I was supposed to go to Portugal, and my husband and I were going back to Costa Rica, and I thought I was going to be able to get new influences, you know, and that was going to be kind of a fresh injection of subject matter. And instead, I ended up kind of just settling into what I was already doing and kind of pushing it in different directions. So Charlie's here. Charlie Farrell and his wife, Amy, were amazing for me because they were feeling like the need for critique too. So I went out to their farmhouse and we social distanced and we put up paintings and we gave each other critique. Because without that, it's very hard. Now you can see my cap already on here. My big 20-pound cap Brody. So yeah, there's no doubt that the work would have been different had I gone back to Costa Rica, had I gone to Portugal, and would have found some fresh new influences. I don't know if it would have been better or worse though, because sometimes it takes me a while to digest. And I know I wouldn't have kept painting the dead birds if that had happened. So it's almost like instead of going this way, I went that way.
Right.
You know, just kind of going deeper into the same subject. I think we have time for like 2 more questions. Yes?
Do you feel like a lot of the work is out of like...
I can't hear you. I'm going to have to come closer.
Sure. A lot of your work is with, like, about animals,
Yeah.
animals, or going to find it. Do you think a lot of your work comes out of sympathy that you have to do a lot with the spiritual as well?
You mean, is the work supposed to be sympathetic towards them?
Yeah. So I noticed that like, even when you weren't painting the animals and doing it with the spiritual, I can see that you kind of tied that thing in usually with
Yeah.
your newer work.
Yeah, I think it all connects. So there is this sense of sympathy, but in some ways it's not really as much about the animals as about how our humanity is manifested in the way that we interact with animals, if that makes sense. I mean, it's weird. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't eat mammals. I kind of arbitrarily draw the line there. And I think everybody has their sense of where they draw that line, except Coco. Like most people wouldn't eat a dog, but they'd eat a pig, right? Well, my sister has pigs, and I think they're as smart as some of her children. So, but they're smarter than dogs. They're incredible. So, I mean, I think I have tremendous like empathy for them, but I think I also project things onto them. You know, I also look at the relationships they have with each other, and I imagine what's in their mind and how they're perceiving a situation. So, yes, I think there is sympathy. Certainly there's horror in how some of them are raised. But I also feel like it's just representation about how the life cycle has changed once it's gone entirely in human hands as opposed to a true natural cycle, if that makes sense. That make sense? Yeah. Yes.
So as an artist, how do you usually find inspiration? Because sometimes when you look at a blank canvas, like I feel like your writer's block.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm really lucky that I get to teach, you know. I mean, spend 5 hours today painting with people, you know. And I don't know. I think it's because I have these general ideas that guide my work, so I don't necessarily get up and say, what am I going to paint today? It's kind of a continuation of what I've already started. So, as I said, I've really started painting those circus bears, and I don't feel like I'm done with the circus bears yet. So I'll probably keep painting circus bears, and hopefully, before I'm done with circus bears, something else will attract my attention, and it'll pick up that current. Does that make sense?
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So like, have you ever like started a piece but like diverted from the blueprint? Or
Oh,
like
yeah.
still or satisfied
Oh, yeah.
with like you just let your imagination run wild?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Some of them are just, they're train wrecks, you know. I mean, I've been painting for all of my adult life, very long time. And yet there's some that are just so hideous. I take a heat gun and just like burn off all the paint, you know, and just start over. Or a couple of them, I think you'll see downstairs when you see them, there's an image underneath that's kind of painted over and is peeking through. Because sometimes what I start with is okay as a foundation, but it's like too much to be on the front. So absolutely, I, you know, have no qualms about starting over because I think the whole thing is a process. I'm not making work like to sell. I mean, if it sells, it's a wonderful, happy accident. And I do show my work in galleries, but I really have this incredibly privileged position of having a day job teaching. So I can paint what I want to make, and the only thing guiding me is really my satisfaction with it, you know? So I don't have to meet a deadline like, oh, I can't destroy this painting because, you know, I need to have it for some project. Like, nope, gets wiped off, you know, and start again. So, and that can be frustrating, but often I learn something by it, you know? Yes, Joey.
Will you allow your students that same grade?
I love it. Did you guys hear that? Do you allow your students? And do I? It's only week 3, but what have I just told you? It's the process, right? Yeah. I said, you know, they've been taking now after.
They're not answering you.
Angie, come on. We just got out of class.
So, yeah, we can restart whenever we want. I spent like an hour painting a single corner of a sheet, and I said, is this, like, how do you feel about this? And he said, you need to tone down your blue. And I had thought that the entire time. I was like, I just don't want to ask her. And I completely regret that decision because now I have to restart.
Yeah. Yeah,
On a
it's a
single corner
process.
of a sheet.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good question, though, that you didn't ask that's related to that. Like, how do I grade a painting, right? If it's all about process, like, how do I grade it? Well, I don't go into a museum and just say, well, that's a B+, and that's a C. I mean, they have a rubric, they have an objective. So they painted those watermelons, they had to match the color, and now they're painting all these white takeout boxes. And so, you know, saying don't use line, use edge, and so if it's out of proportion, just paint it over and start again, because it's that process where your painting gets better, you know? So absolutely, there's nothing worse than continuing to paint the same mistake, where you know it's out of proportion, you know it's too blue, and you just keep going because you don't want to start over. But yeah, I mean, you have to. You have to do that. But you also have to have some deadline somewhere too, because we are in a semester, right? So we only have a finite number of weeks.
But more than 7.
Oh, thank God, more than 7. And thank God we're in person. This has been so nice. I mean, I taught one class fully online last spring, and it was really hard. I don't know if Bria is here, but like, Bria showed up for my painting class, and you know, she said who she was, and I thought I was meeting her for the first time. I didn't realize that she had been on Zoom for an entire 7-week course with me, because her camera wasn't on the whole time. So it's like I'm rediscovering people, and you connect with them in a very different way, even masked. I mean, it's a totally different thing to be able to look at a painting and touch it rather than being like click and seeing if it's sideways, and it's, you know, it's a very, very different thing. So I'm so glad upstairs. Ready? Okay, well, thank you.